Hey everyone, it's Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and I'm back for another episode of the Conscious Resistance Live, brought to you by Civil, the streaming platform and podcasting network that is dedicated to promoting human respect, civil discourse, voluntarism, so many of the things that I believe in, and I'm so grateful to continue to be working with Civil. This week we're going to be covering four main stories. We've got an update on the Jeffrey Epstein ongoing scandal. We're going to look at that and see what's happening there, why the Republicans refuse to open the files related to Jeffrey Epstein. You know, when they've been fighting for years to get these files, and now they're in the position to do so, and they seem to not want to do so. So let's talk about that. We're also going to be talking about this latest scandal related to late night host Jimmy Kimmel and free speech, and the U.S. government, specifically the Federal Communications Commission Chair Brendan Carr putting pressure on Jimmy Kimmel. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about how that relates to MAGA and Republicans under Donald Trump's free speech problem, and a little bit of the hypocrisy surrounding them, not only with free speech, but calls for silencing their critics. Donald Trump, of course, is well known for doing this, but it's something that seems to be gaining steam. And thankfully, there are some people left, right, center, all across the board who are seeing the dangers in this and where it might go, and it's not a good place. And finally, we're going to have an update on some of the Charlie Kirk story. We did a whole hour last week. Most of last week's show was all about Charlie Kirk. There was so many different pieces to dissect. We're not going to do that this week, but there are a couple important updates. And then finally, I want to end tonight by talking to you guys about the next phase in my investigation into the Utah ritual abuse scandal, which is a case that I've been covering for several years now, and that I would like to pick back up, similar to the way I'm picking up my investigation into the Finders cult, and I'd like your help for it, to dive into some new angles. So we're going to talk about all of that, and then of course we'll be playing a brand new music video tonight on the Conscious Resistance Live. Okay, let's go ahead and pick up with this first story. And as I said, there's some updates with the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. You guys know a couple of weeks ago I went to D.C. for the Jeffrey Epstein press conference in Washington, D.C. Some new alleged victims, survivors, have been coming out and speaking out and trying to raise awareness on this. You've also got Thomas Massie, Representative Thomas Massie, trying to, along with Ro Khanna, bipartisan bill, trying to force the release of any remaining Jeffrey Epstein files. In the last couple weeks, we have got some new things, including files that were released by a House committee, as well as the so-called birthday book from Jeffrey Epstein, where a bunch of famous people, including Donald Trump, wrote letters and drew pictures and gave Jeffrey Epstein all sorts of memorabilia of their memories with him. And it did have some new information, some revealing things that I think are relevant. We talked about that last week. But this week, the big story is that the Judiciary panel, the House Judiciary Committee, rejected a request from Democrats to vote on whether or not to subpoena the CEOs of four major banks. These are four major banks that were involved with laundering money for Jeffrey Epstein, so that they could investigate their connection to Epstein and his entire network. And not very much of a surprise to me and probably most of my audience, the majority of the people supporting this were the Democrats. In fact, there was only one Republican, Thomas Massie, who voted with the Democrats, who were the minority committee in the House, to subpoena these banks. All of the Republicans, besides Thomas Massie, voted against this. And I talked about this a little bit last week, how it's just such a, I don't know, the programming is so obvious and so interesting. I feel like hopefully somebody's running a psychological kind of study on all of this to see how easily people are manipulated, because you had the Republicans for the last 4 years during Joe Biden clamoring and claiming, we want the truth about Jeffrey Epstein, release the files, and now they get in power and Trump's like, well, we don't really need to release this. Trump's team's going to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell. They're moving her to a minimum security prison. They're potentially going to offer her a deal at some point. The deal may have already been struck. She got moved from a maximum security prison to a more minimum security prison. And the first prison wasn't even that, that intense or difficult. It was already kind of a swanky place, some would say, compared to other prisons she might, deserve to be in for some of the crimes she was involved in. Nevertheless, now the Republicans are in power, and it's the Democrats who are saying, release the Epstein files, release the Epstein files. And on one hand, I want to say this, that this is just more bipartisan nonsense. Of course, the Democrats now are the party of release Jeffrey Epstein files because, well, they can use it as a point to stick against Donald Trump and say, see, those darn Republicans, they don't want you to see the truth, when we know the Republicans were literally doing the exact opposite 4 years ago. Nevertheless, this bill or this vote would have made a subpoena to Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, Brian Moynihan of Bank of America, Christian Sewing of Deutsche Bank, and Robin Vance of BNY. The request centered around $1.5 billion worth of suspicious transactions that the banks had reported to authorities. And as I said, Thomas Massie became the only Republican to vote in favor of this, joining Democrats in objecting to the motion to squash the subpoena attempt. The rest of the Republicans, they said, no, we're not going to do this. And Democrats also tried to unsuccessfully subpoena Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who has connections to George Soros from years ago, and then as well as Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino. So Democrats trying to get the bank subpoenaed, trying to get Bongino subpoenaed, trying to get Scott Bessent subpoenaed. All of those failed, and Thomas Massie is the only one willing to stand up and do something about it on the Republican side. I want to go ahead and play you two quick clips. This first one is Massie questioning Kash Patel, the head of the FBI. And then the second one's a little 30-second clip where Kash Patel continues to say astounding things, as he's said for the last couple months, going on Joe Rogan, claiming there's no evidence that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked any victims, or that there's a list or anything like that. He continues to lie to your face. I mean, it really is just astounding to me that people take this. But let's go ahead and watch this first clip with Representative Thomas Massie questioning FBI Director Kash Patel.
Mr. Chairman, Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, you've seen most of the files, who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself? You replied, according to the transcript, there is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007 and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors, such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information, and we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought. There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of two different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said
I named one today.
I said we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to the social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information.
Will you personally meet with them?
The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was, so no.
Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit two sets of documents. The first is a series of emails from the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. They are making FOIA requests to get their own FBI files and not having any success. So I want to bring attention to that by submitting that to the record.
You've seen most of the files. Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself?
Himself. There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
So the answer is no one?
For the information that we have.
In the files?
In the case file.
Okay.
So there you have it. Two important things there. First, Kash Patel tells Thomas Massie that, well, for one, he refuses to say he would meet with the victims, the alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein. He says, well, you know, members of the FBI will, and Massie presses him, says, what about you? Will you meet with them? And he refuses to say yes. The second thing there in the second clip is he says that there is no evidence that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked the girls to anyone but himself. And look, let's say that that's possible. And sure, I guess it could be possible, but why would Ghislaine Maxwell be locked up? Because she was definitely involved with the abuse of these young women. And we know that Jean-Luc Bonnel from the M2 modeling agency, who was a French citizen, who was arrested shortly after Jeffrey Epstein and allegedly killed himself as well, that he was involved with trafficking girls to Epstein via modeling agencies. And of course, there's all the various famous people that we know who were connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, that doesn't mean those famous people were implicated directly in the crimes that Jeffrey Epstein's accused of, but it does mean that there's further investigations warranted, as we've been saying for over a decade now. This is why when I went to D.C., I questioned the politicians there, and the alleged victims said, does anybody know anything or had any connection with Les Wexner? And some of them, said that they knew who he was and that he should be further investigated. Nevertheless, that's where it stands right now. The current head of the FBI director, the guy who's on all the podcasts saying, get me in there and I'm going to release all the files, is now saying there's no Epstein list, which I knew for a long time. I was telling you guys I think that was kind of a red herring. But not only that Epstein killed himself. There's nothing, crazy about that. There's nothing more to see. Jeffrey Epstein didn't traffic girls to anybody, and basically just saying that he's not willing to meet with the victims, and the Republicans denying the ability to go after the banks who were involved in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. And I just think it's a sad state of affairs where we're at, guys. And let me say one more thing on this whole incident about the banks. This is one of the reasons why when I talk about exit and build, I often tell you guys that we should exit and build, exit from the banking system and build and support better financial systems. Stop supporting the legacy systems. Because there's a bunch of different crimes the banks have been involved in, but laundering money for Jeffrey Epstein is a big one. So why would you keep your money in Chase? Why would you keep your money in Bank of America unless you want to support people who are involved in crimes like that? I think it's worth your time and energy to take your money out of those banks, divest from them, whether it's about Jeffrey Epstein or something else, go to a local credit union or get into things like Monero or just use cash, stuff it under your mattress, at least you won't be supporting evil systems while you make money and while you save money. Okay, before we go to our next story, I want to remind you guys that I have recently started to partner up with Civil, the podcasting network and streaming platform. I've been working with them the last couple months, first on the release of the Pyramid of Power, the final episode of the Pyramid of Power, which we are very close to releasing coming in November. The final conclusion will be available exclusively on Civil, that's CIVL.com, for the first 5 weeks before it goes publicly elsewhere. And I'm super excited to continue to work with them because, as I've said, we are aligned in values, we're aligned in principles and in mission. And I think it's important to partner with people who do share missions with you because, it's not always easy to find other people who are going to be thinking about the same goals, thinking about how to elevate humanity, thinking about how to bring hard-hitting news and commentary and documentaries and master classes and skill shares. And this is exactly what Civil and I are partnering with to do together. And it's just something that I'm super excited about. So I hope you guys out there in my audience who haven't signed up yet will sign up at civil.com/TCR. That's civil.com/TCR. You can go there. You can learn more about our partnership. You can check out their entire catalog of documentaries, live streams they've done from other events. And you're going to see more documentaries coming from myself and Civil. In fact, I'll just give you a little teaser. One of the things I'm most excited about is a new little mini documentary that will be coming out very soon, which I think I'm going to call Liberation 2030. And it's essentially just a reimagining of the world of 2030 and beyond. We all know that the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, they have their Agenda 2030 that they're working on night and day to try to build the world of their dreams. And it doesn't necessarily include us. It's not a bottom-up, it's a top-down world where they get to dictate our lives and decide what sort of world we're going to live in. And I don't think that's what most of us out there want. I think we want something that does include our voices, where we have freedom of choice, freedom of speech, freedom to live our lives and decide our own destinies. And that is what I think we should be putting our energy into. So in this short little mini documentary, we are going to kind of reimagine 2030. Instead of focusing on the Agenda 2030 from the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, we're going to say, what is our Agenda 2030? What is Liberation 2030? And this mini documentary is going to be one vision of an alternative 2030, and that's going to premiere exclusively on Civil. So again, it's civil.com/TCR. Go there, sign up, CIVL.com/TCR. The links are below the video. All right, let's go ahead and continue, guys. This next story, you've probably heard about it by now, but Jimmy Kimmel, the late night TV show host, is in some, he's in some trouble, has been in some trouble for some comments he made about Charlie Kirk. Unfortunately, even though we're not directly talking about Charlie Kirk, we will later. A lot of the things we're going to talk about tonight do relate to him, because it seems as if the Charlie Kirk shooting, the assassination, the claims around it are being used in multiple ways to attack free speech, to give the government under Donald Trump an excuse to expand their power. And this is, of course, what we always expect from governments, no matter which party's in power. But let's check this out. So this is from The Independent, what Jimmy Kimmel said about the Charlie Kirk shooting that got his late night show canceled. And here is his exact words. I want to make sure you guys know, I want to speak for him. He said this. This is on September 14th. We had some new lows of the weekend, with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and with everything they can to score political points from it. And Kimmel said on Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism, but on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this. And then he shows a clip of Trump where Trump is asked about how he's doing after Charlie Kirk's shooting. He says, pretty good. And then he says, oh, and by the way, right there, you see all the trucks. They just started the construction of the new ballroom for the White House. And, Jimmy Kimmel's kind of making fun of this. And he says, yes, he's at the fourth stage of grief, construction. And he says, this is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish, okay? And he says there's something wrong with Trump after showing a clip of Donald Trump bringing up the renovation, again, while talking about Charlie Kirk on Fox and Friends. And so that clip goes viral, and for multiple reasons. Trump is triggered by anybody making fun of him, right? But mainly people took offense of Jimmy Kimmel saying that MAGA was trying so hard to deny that Tyler Robinson, the alleged shooter of Charlie Kirk, was MAGA, when it's since come out that, or at least according to some early reports and from statements by the governor of Utah, that he had been radicalized by left-wing ideology in recent years. He did grow up in a conservative family. As I said last week, all of his family said they didn't even know a single Democrat growing up. But in the last couple years, he'd apparently been more radicalized. He was dating a transgender person, living with them as a roommate, partner, etc. And that person is helping the authorities. But Jimmy Kimmel made this statement, and there was immediate backlash. So then we go to FCC Chair Brendan Carr, who goes on the right-wing provocateur, and in this case, I mean it, absolutely provocateur, when I'm talking about Benny Johnson. Benny Johnson is such a joke, and if you're not on Twitter, you probably don't know who he is because he's just one of these guys that has made his living off hot takes on Twitter. But Brendan Carr, the chair of the FCC, goes on Benny Johnson's podcast, and he says, talking about Jimmy Kimmel, he says, "This is a very, very serious issue right now for Disney. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to take action on Kimmel, or there is going to be some additional work for the FCC ahead. They have a license granted to us at the FCC, and that comes with an obligation to operate in the public interest." So some people, myself included, would see that as a very thinly veiled threat, where the head of this commission, which is, you know, if you don't know about the FCC, they regulate the airwaves, the radio, TV, somewhat the internet, but not nearly as much. And he's basically saying, we give them a license, they're not operating in the public interest. And look, this isn't a defense of Jimmy Kimmel. I don't think Jimmy Kimmel's particularly funny. Late night shows have never been my thing. I don't have to agree with his politics. But he is surely free to say a stupid joke and say whatever he wants. And he is also free to be wrong. He can be wrong, and then he can come on later and correct himself and say, you know, I said that Tyler Robinson was MAGA, but we have learned he's not MAGA, and, you know, he can update himself. But instead, he goes on, he makes a dumb joke. Trump gets triggered by it. Trump's hand-picked commissioner of the FCC goes on a huge podcast with millions of followers and says, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, putting pressure on Disney. Disney owns ABC, which runs Jimmy Kimmel's show. And then after that podcast comes out, Nexstar Media Group, which is a media group which does have stations that are affiliated with ABC, they said that they were going to preempt Jimmy Kimmel's show for the foreseeable future after his remarks, and which means they were going to start playing other shows. They weren't going to host his show on their platform anymore. And then they basically, from that, it led to ABC in general announcing that they were going to cancel Jimmy Kimmel's show, and it was taken off the air. And then so after that, Barack Obama got involved. He posted on X on last Thursday saying, after years of complaining about cancel culture, the current administration has taken it to a new and dangerous level by routinely threatening regulatory action against media companies unless they muzzle or fire reporters and commentators they don't like. This is precisely the kind of government coercion that the First Amendment was designed to prevent, and media companies need to start standing up rather than capitulating to it. And you know what? I hate to say it, but I agree with Obama here. You don't have to like Obama. I don't like Jimmy Kimmel. But they are correct. And I'll show you a few more comments here. This is one I tweeted out an article. Even Ted Cruz is against the pressure on TV networks to remove Jimmy Kimmel. Ted Cruz did on his own podcast, calling it dangerous as hell. And this is coming from a CNN article where it covers some of what Ted Cruz said on his podcast. Here, I'll quote him directly. Ted Cruz said Brendan Carr's threats to pull ABC's broadcast license were unbelievably dangerous. And he said that these are similar to mafioso tactics, which is the mob. And and so you have even Republican conservative people like Ted Cruz criticizing this move. And I think that's the right move. It's the right thing to do, to call this out, to not be bipartisan. Now, of course, again, this is not, I feel like I have to keep repeating myself because somebody's going to be like, oh my God, Derrick, you're defending Ted Cruz. No, I'm not defending Ted Cruz. He is horrible in many, many ways. But in this instance, he is right. And so is Obama. But Obama's right here as well. This is not a good thing. And it's been astounding to me as I'm posting about this on social media, showing people this, and people are defending it. And here's another one I want to show you. I tweeted this. It says, she's right. MAGA is proving they have no principles. FCC Commissioner Carr might be trying to remake himself under Trump's second term. But I remember when he helped fast-track the 5G rollout under Trump the first time, and I'm going to show you that in a moment. Using the force of government to pressure networks to cancel people, saying things you don't like, is the same thing the left has done for years. And here's Anna M. Gomez who is the other FCC commissioner. So there's 3 FCC commissioners. Brendan Carr is the chair of it, and she is the Democratic commissioner. And she says, an inexcusable act of political violence by one disturbed individual must never be exploited as justification for broader censorship and control. And of course, she's talking about Charlie Kirk shooting. The administration is increasingly using the weight of government power to suppress lawful expression. And here's the clip. That's Benny Johnson there on the left. That's Brendan Carr on there, and that's where he's talking about we can do this the easy way, the hard way. And Ana Gomez of the FCC says, and it is doing so not because speech glorifies violence or breaks the law, but because it challenges those in power or reflects views that they oppose. We must stand firm against every attempt to silence dissent, punish satirists and government critics, and erode individual liberty. To surrender our right is to speak freely. Our right to speak freely is to accept that those in power, not the people, will set the boundaries of debate that define a free society. Now, guys, before you start typing in the comments, yes, it is hypocritical to hear the Democrats talk about free speech after everything we saw during COVID and to see the silencing of people during COVID. Does that mean what Brendan Carr is doing is right? Of course it doesn't mean it's right, but it is hypocritical of them. I'm not denying that. But still, what's more hypocritical to me is the people, the libertarians, the people on the right, conservatives who have fought for free speech the last couple years, who then turn around and now are all about cancel culture. Yes, it's cancel culture. Just because people are saying mean, ugly things about Charlie Kirk's assassination or things you don't like, that doesn't mean you should be acting the same way. We get this tit for tat where both sides are just willing to use either the force of government or trying to get people canceled at their jobs, and it's just back and forth and back and forth. And unfortunately, my friends, it is a race to the bottom, a race towards tyranny if we don't stop it. We must get past this mentality that, oh, they did it first, so now we're going to do it. And I have people telling me, Derrick, you can have your silly libertarian principles, but when the enemy is willing to use violence, we got to do the same thing. And this is just what we've seen throughout history, how every revolution which leads to a civil war starts with people thinking they need to use violence against the quote-unquote other side. And in reality, the predator class, the people at the top, are benefiting from this. They're benefiting from the fact that they've got the people fighting over who's going to silence their critics first. And eventually what we lead to is a lack of free speech, because both sides have decided, well, if they're going to say mean things, we're going to say mean things. We're going to cancel them before they can cancel us. And then we're going to use violence against them before they use violence against us. It's just going to get worse and worse unless we pump the brakes. Now, the latest update, as I'm recording this, Jimmy Kimmel to return to ABC on Tuesday after show's controversial suspension. Walt Disney Company has put out a statement. Last Wednesday, we made the decision to suspend production on the show to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. It is a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive. We have spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy, and after those conversations, we reached the decision to return to the show on Tuesday. My guess is he's going to come back and he's going to apologize for it, which still... Okay, they're bringing the show back, but still the fact that he's got to come back and more than likely apologize, it just shows you that the threats from Donald Trump, the threats from Brendan Carr are working, because they can temporarily get him suspended, they can get him to come back and then have to apologize for it. That's still not a good thing, guys, okay? Again, I don't watch Jimmy Kimmel's show, I couldn't really care for him, but having the government put pressure on somebody, a network then canceling him and then bringing him back, and he's going to have to probably, I'm so sorry, you know, I made a joke and I was wrong, blah, blah. And I guess he's willing to do it to keep his job. But that's a sad state of affairs. And I don't think anybody would be supporting this, who is currently supporting this, the conservatives, if it was Obama doing it, if it was the Biden administration or the Clinton administration, et cetera. And it's sad that things are at that point, that we're in this bipartisan left-right framing where people have no principles and just stick to party over principles, but that's where we're at. The other thing I want to mention before I show you a little bit of my history with Brendan Carr, the FCC commissioner, is I know some of you say, Derrick, this is all distraction. And I have a whole nother tangent to go on about how the crowd out there is like, everything's a distraction. Guys, some of us can juggle more than one thought at a time. We can think about Gaza and Palestine while also thinking about Jeffrey Epstein, while also thinking about Charlie Kirk, and also thinking about this free speech thing with Jimmy Kimmel, okay? So not everything's a distraction from something else. But isn't it convenient that this happens, the suspension happens, and then within a week, okay, we're bringing Jimmy Kimmel back. But for the last week, people have been talking about this. It's been on our minds. And I do think we need to be wary of that, how the predator class will use different events like this to keep us distracted, to keep us fighting each other and chasing our tails. And if we're just in a reactive state constantly, we're letting them win. We're letting them guide us and decide what we think about, what we talk about, and we need to be stronger than that. So, all right, before we go on to our next story, I do want to show you a little bit of my history with Brendan Carr, which I think you might find interesting. For those of you who've not been following me for more than 5 years, you probably don't know anything about this, but Brendan Carr, head of the FCC, he was the head of the FCC during Trump's first administration. He is the man responsible for the rollout of 5G. If you don't know anything about 5G, go to theconsciousresistance.com, look at the documentary page, watch my 2020 documentary, The 5G Trojan Horse. Smart cities, surveillance concerns, privacy concerns, health concerns, loss of local power concerns, and this guy, Brendan Carr, is responsible for it in many ways. He came to Houston in 2019, September 2019, September 30th, and then October 1st. He was in Houston for 2 days, and I went to this press conference, to this 5G event, and I actually confronted him twice. One of the times, I got him to answer some questions for me. As you can see, for those who are watching on the screen, that's his face, and I'm going to play the clip. And then the very next day, I actually found him out in the streets, and I followed him through the streets of downtown to question him on a number of things. So we're going to play these 2 quick clips, and I want you guys to watch just how disturbingly like a robot this guy is. So there were lawsuits related to 5G going on, and I decided to confront him and ask him about this, and he just repeats his talking point over and over, like 2 or 3 times in a row. And I said, okay, but are you going to answer my question? He's like, we're really excited for the rollout of 5G, and he just stumbles over his words. And then, as I said, the next day, since he didn't want to answer questions for me, I just followed him out on the street. And this is honestly one of my highlights. I love confronting politicians, getting out there doing that real journalism. So check this out. And I do apologize. I have my little brief introduction music from the old Conscious Resistance days, but just check this out. This is me questioning FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, the same guy who's now calling for removing licenses from people who say mean things about MAGA, confronting him in 2019 in Houston, Texas, about 5G.
On Monday, September 30th, 2019, Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner met with the Federal Communication Commission Commissioner Brendan Carr and other officials to discuss the future of 5G in Houston. Mayor Turner and Mr. Carr discussed the potential for job opportunities relating to 5G technology. However, there was no discussion on the ongoing lawsuits in Texas and across the United States where local and state officials allege that the FCC and the wireless industry are usurping local power and forcing the 5G rollout down the throats of communities. I asked Commissioner Carr about the concerns regarding his connections with the wireless industry. Carr worked at the law firm Wiley Rain, and his clients were Verizon, AT&T, CenturyLink, the CTIA, which is the wireless lobby, and the USTA, which is the telecom lobby. I also asked Mr. Carr about the captured agency report released by Harvard School of Ethics. Unfortunately, Mr. Carr had no interest in addressing these questions.
All right. I'm about to interview FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. Mr. Carr, did you have a minute? You have a second?
Hey, what's your name?
Derrick Broze with 90.1 KPFT.
Good to see you.
Do you have a moment?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Just set up. You can just stand right there and we'll just set up real quick.
I gotta get him involved some more time.
That's the 2 minutes. That's the 2 minutes.
People need to hear from me.
We'll be playing this on the air today. And I'm probably going to be at the event tomorrow too, so I'll try to do some more. All right. So I'll do it in
Wow. Got it.
So you've been with the FCC for a little bit now, and we're here today talking about the 5G rollout. How do you respond to those communities around the country who are fighting based on property rights or just different, pushback? What's the FCC position on that?
We're very excited about the build-out of 5G and next-gen internet infrastructure. And at the FCC, we've been really building on a lot of the policies that state and local leaders have been putting in place to make sure that every single community can benefit. It's really a great job story. It's a great story for economic growth. So we're really happy with the progress that we're seeing in building out 5G, both here in Houston and a lot of other communities around the country.
What about those who have concerns, say, for example, Harvard, to put out the study about captured agency, that folks like yourself who've been lawyers and worked in the industry are essentially captured the regulators? This idea that the FCC can't be trusted to regulate 5G and cell phones and things of that sort because of not only yours but Ajit Pai and others' industry connections.
Yeah, we're really glad to see the growth in 5G. And one of the things that we've done at the FCC is build on the policies put in place by local elected leaders here in Houston. Texas, the state legislature put policies in place that help guide the way for 5G builds. So we're really excited with the progress that we're seeing by really taking the lead of so many of these local elected officials.
No comment on the conflict of interest concerns?
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Good to talk to you.
On Tuesday, October 1st, 2019, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr once again participated in a 5G Futures event, promoting only the alleged potential benefits of 5G and making no mention of privacy concerns, health concerns, local power concerns, property concerns, or environmental concerns. He also failed to mention the fact that there are several lawsuits going on involving Texas cities, as well as lawsuits involving states around the country, fighting the FCC's ruling and fighting state laws.
Mr. Carr, can I follow up with you on yesterday?
I'm good, man. Thank you.
All right, well, then we'll just do it this way. All right, so look, you have ties to the industry. We'll just be more blunt this time since trying nice doesn't seem to work with you guys. So you have ties to the industry.
Thanks, man.
You omitted those facts. This is not press. You're a public servant. You're walking the streets. So you've been with the FCC. You've worked with a law firm that defended the CTI, the people who organized this whole thing. The CTI gave the mayor the 5G Wireless Champion Award. I mean, essentially this whole thing was just a big industry. There's not a single mention of lawsuits on the state level, on the federal level. I'm sure you're aware that there are cities in Texas that are suing right now because those are the stakeholders that are being ignored. They're not, the surveillance concerns are being ignored. You guys talked about all these sensors, all these great things, but not a single person mentioned that there are privacy concerns, there are health concerns that I know you're aware. The FCC recently announced that they're even going to reevaluate cell phones because the Chicago Tribune study showed that iPhones are putting off 200 times the radiation that you guys allow and say is safe. I mean, realistically, you can't even comment on that.
Thanks, man. It's really good to see you again. Thanks for showing up at the event. Appreciate it.
Of course I'm here, but I mean, I'm just saying people see you respond like this and it doesn't even seem like human. You can't even acknowledge or say a simple statement. But I guess that's what we should expect from the federal government. All right, there we go. Number 2, Brendan Carr. Can't answer a question, has me chasing him down the streets of downtown Houston. Instead of talking to me like a person, he just walks away and says he can't talk to me. This is why I'm here, guys. This is why you support me, is because I'm out here hitting the ground, talking to the people, asking the questions that nobody else will, talking about 5G, talking about other issues, and raising awareness because these people are corrupt, they're full of it, and they just held this 5G event that all it did was mention only the positive aspects of 5G, didn't even touch on a single point mentioning that Houstonians, people across Texas and around the country have privacy concerns, have health concerns, property rights concerns, local power concerns, and instead all these 5G events that they keep hosting here in Houston are just completely pro 5G. So, this is Derrick Broze for the Conscious Resistance Network, signing off. Peace. All right, there you have it. Derrick Broze, Conscious Resistance, and that was back in 2019. I'm definitely still proud of that work. All right, guys, before we go on to our next couple of stories, I want to remind you guys one more time about Civil. Go to civil.com, CIVL.com. For those who are watching on screen, you can see more here. Upgrade civilization. It says Civil is the hub for experiments in flourishing. Stream award-winning films, shows, and events. Join Civil and be part of building the future you want to live in. Be an early adopter. We're just getting started. Right there on the front page, you see the Pyramid of Power. There's the Words and Numbers podcast. The California Typewriter. There's all kinds of podcasts, documentaries, Undivide Us, The Exiles, Peace Officer. I know that they have Aaron Schwartz documentary, The Internet's Own Boy. Lots of different feature films. Some of them are original. Some of them are shows that they're just hosting that are out there on the internet. They've got podcasts like the Larry Sharpe Show, The Sharp Way, Dad Saves America, Nick Gillespie, Reason Roundtable. There's a lot of content on here, guys. So if you sign up on an annual subscription for $50 a year, you can use the code TCR20. That's for the Conscious Resistance, TCR20, and get 20% off. You're going to get access to my content on there, including early access to the Pyramid of Power and the upcoming films that I'm working on, including Liberation 2030 and more that we will be producing later down the line, masterclasses, skill shares, so many cool things. So go over to civil.com and use the code TCR20 when you sign up, guys. All right, let's jump into our next story. The free speech problem that MAGA has. This is kind of a continuation of what we were just discussing. Like I said, some of this is just related to Charlie Kirk. These next couple stories, we're going to show you how MAGA does have a free speech problem, despite what they claim or want to believe. This is what I posted the other day. The inevitable escalation in the fight against free speech. Now the right/MAGA embrace hate speech as a means for limiting the First Amendment. And I'm talking about Attorney General Pam Bondi. And I will acknowledge, of course, she put out a statement. Lots of people reacted. And then she came back and kind of had to correct herself because people were pushing back. She says, hate speech that crosses into the line into threats of violence is not protected by the First Amendment. It's a crime. For far too long, we've watched the radical left normalize threats, calls for assassinations, and cheer on political violence. That era is over, according to her. She goes on to say, under 18 U.S. Code 875, it's a federal crime to transmit, quote, any communication containing any threat to kidnap any person or any threat to injure the person or another. So she's listing some U.S. codes that I think they're going to try to use to go after so-called hate speech. Says, quote, you cannot call for someone's murder. You cannot swat a member of the Congress. You cannot dox a conservative family and think it will be brushed off as free speech. These acts are punishable crimes, and every single threat will be met with the full force of law. Free speech protects ideas, debate, even dissent, but it does not and will never protect violence. It is clear that violent rhetoric is designed to silence others from voicing conservative ideals. You see how she frames that? It's not just about silencing people of all opinions. It's about silencing conservative ideals. We will never be silenced, not for our families, not for our freedoms, and never for Charlie. His legacy will not be erased by fear or intimidation. Interesting, she got community noted on Twitter, where readers have added context. The U.S. Constitution protects most violent speech. The Supreme Court ruled it legal to justify or celebrate violence or advocate or teach the duty, necessity, or propriety of violence, but not incitement to imminent violence, e.g. telling a mob with weapons to kill somebody. So actually, there is protected free speech even related to violence. Not that we need to support it, condone it, or anything like that. And she's getting ate up in the comments with people calling her back. People saying, stop using the word hate speech. There's no going back on what you've attempted to do. Your actions in the week of Charlie's death are disgusting, and Americans see you for exactly who you are. You cannot be real right now. And it's basically just the right embracing what they accuse the left of doing. Because, to be clear, the problem with so-called hate speech or hate crimes is that it creates a special class of crimes or of speech. There is no such thing as hate speech or hate crimes. There is violence, there's assault, and there's ugly speech. And as the famous Ron Paul said, you know, free speech isn't for talking about the weather, it's for talking about dangerous things, unpopular opinions. It doesn't mean you have to agree, but that's what free speech is about. So now, MAGA, not everybody, I want to make sure, because I know some people out there say, Derrick, you're generalizing all of us, we don't all support this. And that's true, not all of MAGA is supporting this, as you can see in the comments. But for sure, the most diehards, the Benny Johnsons, the influencers out there that are trying to continue to create division and conflict, as I was showing on last week's show, they are standing behind this. They're saying, go after them, and we're going to show you in just a moment how this is expanding. Now, Ali Zek, for those of you who follow her, know who she is, she tweeted this out. A lot of people out there the last few days have been celebrating kids being kicked out of universities and people being fired from their jobs due to their comments on Charlie Kirk. Yet they were the same ones crying about free speech being taken away when the left was in power a few years ago, trying to shut them down. Free speech doesn't mean only speech I agree with, and no, it doesn't mean as long as it doesn't offend my politics or religion. Anytime you're begging government, universities, or corporations to punish people for their words, you're not defending truth, you're defending control. And you might want to consider what happens when the power swings back the other way. And so this is, as somebody says, this is the eye for an eye. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, right? They did it first, so now we're going to do it. It's obviously a race to the bottom, and I think any intelligent person can see where this is headed, and it's not a good person. I tweeted this. In the last couple weeks, we've learned that Republicans under Trump are willing to support the following: bombings of international boats in international waters without congressional approval, which, by the way, happened again this week. canceling people for their ugly opinions and views, the federal government going after so-called hate speech, using the FCC to pressure TV networks to cancel Jimmy Kimmel, and the feds going after domestic extremists, as we're going to talk about in just a moment. Once again, we have evidence that the mainstream left and right are not so different. They are both willing to use the violence of government when it serves their goals. And worst of all, they convince their blind followers to abandon any semblance of principle in the name of supporting their corporate team. Party politics inevitably leads to a lack of principles. Reject this mindset and stand on principle. Choose what is right and what is moral over what the parties promote. And I think that's the big thing. This all comes back to party politics. People continue to support the party politics, continue to blindly support their quote-unquote side rather than standing on principle. And as I mentioned here, people supporting the feds going after domestic extremists. Well, as of when I'm recording this on Monday afternoon, Monday evening, we have this report. The White House says Trump could sign order designating Antifa a terrorist organization as soon as Monday. In fact, by the time you're hearing this, this might have already happened. Now, for those who don't know, Antifa stands for anti-fascist. And this, to me, is one of the biggest psyops of the last decade, that people could be tricked to thinking that being an anti-fascist is a bad thing. It makes you a terrorist. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be Antifa in the terms of being the left-wing radicals that hang out in Seattle and Portland and other left-wing cities that like to do black bloc. And for those who don't know, black bloc simply means dressing in all black. It's a tactic that's been around in the left since at least the 90s, early 90s, probably longer than that. And it's meant to not only provide a little bit of privacy and anonymity, but when you're in a big group of people all dressed in black, it creates the illusion of size and mass and power. This is what people call the black bloc. And that is where Antifa has sort of evolved out of. And so people will dress in black bandanas, black helmets, black shirts and clothes. They're also trying to protect their identities in case they want to go out there and fight the cops and things like that. And look, some of you might not like that. Personally, I think there's a time and a place to go fight the cops and fight the government. I think there will be, and there continues to be times for that. That doesn't mean I agree with every Antifa or black bloc action that has taken place. But out of that black bloc, which is, again, just a concept, it's not an organization, out of that has come Antifa, the anti-fascists. But Antifa is not an organization like the DNC or the RNC or the Christian church or something like that, where you sign up and you get a membership card and you go to meetings and you pay dues. It is an idea. And this is one of the things that I don't think that MAGA or the right or a lot of you conservatives can really understand. It is an idea. And so by trying to say Antifa is a terrorist group, not only does it completely miss and understand the idea of what this concept is, it also is setting the stage for the Donald Trump administration to really go after anybody. They could label anybody Antifa. They can say, well, you're Antifa, so now you're a domestic terrorist. And guys, we don't want to be in a world where we encourage the use of labels like domestic terrorism, domestic extremism. It is only going to go worse places. Eventually, the Democrats will get back in power, and they're going to say, well, MAGA is a domestic terrorist organization, and we're going to have MAGA and Antifa. And again, MAGA is an idea. It's not an organization. Anybody can claim that, oh, I'm part of the MAGA movement, right? So what do you want? Wearing a red hat that says Make America Great Again to become a terrorist, terrorist symbol? But Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, she said, Antifa is going to be designated a domestic terrorist organization. Let's go ahead and roll the clip right here. Check this out.
Antifa is going to be designated a domestic terrorist organization. The president intends to sign that executive order very soon as it's drafted, as soon as today, later this afternoon. And this is something the president campaigned on because we have seen a rise in violence perpetuated by Antifa radical people across this country who subscribe to this group. And unfortunately, it's gone widely uncovered by many in the legacy media. It also went completely ignored by the previous administration. Not anymore. Not only, as you mentioned, were the bullet casings subscribed with Antifa mottos, if you will, in the heinous assassination of Charlie, but there have also been more examples than I could read off for you here in this briefing room today of violence from Antifa. I will just read a few. In July 2025, several members of an Antifa cell ambushed and opened fire on officers at an ICE facility in Alvarado, Texas, shooting one officer in the neck. Also, in July 2025, 3 Antifa members were charged with assaulting a police officer during a violent riot outside an ICE facility in Portland, which for weeks prior had been under siege from the local Antifa terror cell. In February 2024, a transgender Antifa terrorist detonated an explosive device outside of the office of the Republican Attorney General of Alabama. In July 2023, Antifa members linked to abortionist group Jane's Revenge firebombed pro-life facilities and vandalized churches. In January 2022, a suspected Antifa member was arrested for bringing a pipe bomb to a pro-Trump event. In January 2021, an Antifa supporter threatened to shoot police officers and Trump supporters outside of the Florida State Capitol building. Again, I could continue to list many more examples for those in the room who don't believe this is a serious threat to American safety and our national security, but this administration knows that it is. That's why the president will be signing this order. And we will also be, most importantly, looking at who is funding Antifa and who is funding these other violent left-wing groups that we've seen perpetuate so much crime and mayhem across our country.
All right, so there you hear it. And look, she listed off some crimes of people. Maybe those people called themselves Antifa, or they were dressed in black bloc again, or they had the anti-fascist symbol or something like that, or they were radical leftists, because I'm not going to deny that there are radical leftists who do believe in property damage and violence. I grew up activist-wise and around a lot of left-wing radicals who do believe that and who think that violence is justified. Just like some on the right believe violence is justified in some cases. I'm not trying to deny that. But again, this is an idea, a concept, and by trying to say we're going to designate that as a terrorist organization, it opens up the door to labeling almost anybody as a terrorist. So here's a little bit of insight from CNN where they're actually correct here. The term Antifa, short for anti-fascist, is used to define a broad group of people whose political beliefs lean toward the left, often the far left, but do not conform with the Democratic Party platform. Unlike militant far-right groups like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, and again, those are their words, not mine, Antifa has never had a leader, nor is there a hierarchy or a command structure. While some local groups are well organized, Antifa's lack of a national structure would make it hard for the administration to go after leaders or funding sources. While it is illegal to provide material support to groups designated by the government as a foreign terrorist organization, there is not an analogous law for domestic groups. And Trump posted on social media last week, "I am pleased to inform our many USA patriots that I am designating Antifa, a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster, as a major terror organization." So there's even been some pushback by conservatives, though. Check this out. This is from the National Review, which is definitely a pro-Trump right-wing organization and outlet. From their editing team says, "We can smash Antifa without designating them." I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this will be in the show notes. It says, "We've been here before. Trump made a similar announcement in 2020 but never followed up. In one sense, the exercise may be pointless. Counterterrorism law only allows the designation of foreign terrorist organizations, and in the past, the Trump admin has branded Antifa a domestic terror outfit. Our domestic laws provide plenty of tools by which groups can be investigated and prosecuted for promoting any criminal activity. We already criminalize contributing money to financing acts of domestic terrorism. Arguing about designation does almost nothing. What matters is investigating the conduct of people and charging them with relevant crimes. Some may argue that designating Antifa is necessary because it has been regarded, to this point, as only a brand name adopted by individual criminals. It's true that experts mostly view the organization as non-hierarchical. It has some entrepreneurial leaders who drift from one autonomous cell to another. It wants to look like a paramilitary movement that clears out fascists, but the reality is more pathetic," in their words. But this is still not a significant bar to law enforcement, who are completely justified in going after even loose-knit groups to commit crimes. We've seen this before. What happens when there's an over-insistence by political leaders on supposed domestic political threats? You get cock-up investigations and confusing plots where it's unclear whether FBI agents and informers are investigating actual domestic terrorists or merely seducing and entrapping people into plans mostly hatched by agents and informers. Meanwhile, we should not be ceding more power to investigators to watch Americans without getting a warrant. I mean, they're making a great point for conservatives to consider. It would be better to simply act within the guidelines of our already ample federal law codes. Surveillance of American citizens for terror plots requires the FBI to show that they are being directed by foreigners and that they appear to be violating criminal statutes. Otherwise, the tools already in the hands of law enforcement to treat violent members of Antifa and their willing co-conspirators with seriousness they deserve. So they're basically saying, look, we've already got laws in the books, and not only that, by kind of creating this specter of domestic terrorism, domestic extremism, you're going to justify the FBI going after people like we saw after 9/11, and most of the cases we've been told of catching terrorists or domestic extremists have been the FBI entrapping people. And I thought that Kash Patel, you know, that guy that said that Jeffrey Epstein didn't traffic anybody to anybody, I thought he wanted to go shut down the FBI and, you know, turn it into a museum and get rid of it. But instead now they want to go after people who label themselves Antifa. Now, some people are going to celebrate this. They're going to say, finally, Trump, this is what I voted for. Trump is going after the bad guys. I guarantee you this is going to backfire, and it's going to go some dangerous places if we allow this to happen, if we stand by. We've seen what happened after 9/11 when people were labeled terrorists and extremists. And I want to remind you, this will be in the show notes, about a report I did back in 2020 when Trump was saying similar things and a lot of people were buying into it. The danger of labeling your political enemies domestic terrorists. This is a video I did back in 2020. You can check that out in the show notes, because I think that's really, we're back there again. People are wanting to use these labels, and it's going to get very bad if we allow it to happen, guys. Don't fall into that trap. Yes, you can oppose some of the left-wing violence and say that that's not right, that's not correct, and yet still not fall into the trap of embracing this language of the war of terror. Remember that? The war of terror, the post-9/11 hysteria, where people were getting rounded up and kidnapped by the government just because they said that they were a terrorist, even if they never provided any evidence. That's where we are going, my friends. So I want to invite you guys to not buy into this. And if you see people pushing this rhetoric online, please, 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 for the love of freedom of speech and for everything that the United States allegedly stands for, please push back on it, guys. Don't buy into it. Don't participate in it. You're only going to be hurting yourself in the long term. All right, we got one more story. And as you guys know who are watching on video, I'm losing sunlight. I'm not in my usual home. As I said earlier, I'm in a hotel. I'm in Kansas City. I just came back from a really cool event called Thrive Alive. It was a vegan festival, and I know a lot of you are triggered by vegans, but it was really cool. It was a sober event, family-friendly event, vegan-friendly event. Not everybody there was vegan, but it was cool. I got to speak about my message of anarchism, voluntarism, of upgrading human civilization and promoting individual liberty and human respect, and exit and build strategy to a vegan audience. Because I get to, it's interesting for me because I get to speak at a lot of different events, crypto events, freedom events, conspiracy events, and every time I go into these different communities, I feel like they've got a piece of the puzzle, but then there's lots of blind spots. And so when I speak to the crypto community, okay, cool, you guys get crypto, try to get out of the banking system, but maybe you're devoid of spirituality, maybe you're eating like crap, things like that. Or I go to the spiritual community. Okay, you guys get the spiritual message. You understand that we're in a spiritual war. We want to continue to elevate ourselves on a conscious level and on a deeper interpersonal level. But then maybe you're still supporting government. So I bring the freedom-minded, the anarchist message. And maybe I go to the anarchists, but then they don't have the spirituality. It's like, because I've spent so much time over the last 15 years dipping my toes and working with and collaborating with different people, even people who I don't agree with on everything. I know it's a scary thought. That allows me to have a broader perspective, so I can come into different communities like the vegan community and say, you guys have part of the message as far as I'm concerned, but you're missing out on these other areas. And so it was a really cool event. I will be posting my 2 talks from Thrive Alive in the coming weeks. I gave 2 talks, one just about exit and build, and then the other sort of a deep dive on how vegans can adopt exit and build. And thank you to everybody who was at that event, everybody I got to connect with. I got to meet some fellow conspiracy realists that were there in that crowd, and it was really cool. But that is why I'm not at home. I'll be back in Mexico starting tomorrow, so please forgive me for my lack of perfect lighting and for being in this hotel right now. All right, guys, let's go ahead to our final story. A little bit of updates on the Charlie Kirk situation. Here we go. All right, so this one, like I said, we're not going to get super deep, but there's just been a couple of things that are worth exploring. We have some associates of Charlie Kirk putting out some information about the shooting of Charlie Kirk, you know, the bullet wound specifically. some of you out there were posting after I did my show last week and said, hey, Derrick, you missed a big thing. They shot Charlie Kirk. It allegedly went through the left side of his neck, and they haven't recovered the bullet. We haven't heard anything about it. Also, with a 30-06 rifle, the bullet, I mean, some people said his whole neck should have been blown apart, and we should have seen, the bullet go through him and maybe even hit some people behind him. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. Well, I say fortunately, that nobody got hurt, but unfortunately we haven't got more information. Until recently. Now we have Andrew Colvett, who is a Turning Point USA spokesperson and is the executive producer of the Charlie Kirk Show, who put this statement out just a couple of days ago, and it's gotten 20 million views, which is pretty incredible. He says, quote, I want to address some of the discussion about the lack of an exit wound with Charlie. I'm usually not interested in delving into most of this kind of online chatter, and I apologize this is somewhat graphic. But in this case, the fact that there wasn't an exit wound is probably another miracle, and I want people to know. I just spoke with a surgeon who worked on Charlie in the hospital. He said the bullet, quote, absolutely should have gone through, which is very normal for a high-powered, high-velocity round. I've seen wounds from this caliber many times, and they always just go through everything. They should have taken a moose or two down, an elk, etc. So that is, according to the executive producer of Charlie Kirk's show, that is from the surgeon who worked on Charlie Kirk. Then he continues. But it didn't go through. Charlie's body stopped it. I mentioned this to the doctor that there were dozens of staff, students, and special guests standing directly behind Charlie Kirk on the other side of the tent. And he replied, again, this is the surgeon, it was an absolute miracle that someone else didn't get killed. His bones, talking about Charlie's, were so healthy and the density was so impressive that he's like the man of steel. It should have just gone through and through. It would likely have killed those standing behind him. In the end, the coroner says, hey guys, I did find the bullet. It was just beneath the skin. Even in death, Charlie managed to save the lives of those around him. Remarkable, miraculous. Oh my God, guys, make of that what you will, but to me this just sounds insane. They're trying to make this guy a martyr. And there's so much religious symbology and messaging, just like with the alleged assassination attempt of Donald Trump last year, where the picture of Trump with his hands praying and people saying it's a miracle, he's saved by God. And if you follow my work, you know I do not trust that event. I don't claim to know what happened, but I definitely think it was staged in some way. I don't claim to know by who, but I don't trust it in any way. And now we're hearing Charlie Kirk being labeled a martyr, and we're hearing all kinds of religious language like that. And now the surgeon telling the executive producer of Charlie Kirk's show that it was a miracle. Charlie was the man of steel, that his bones were so dense that when the bullet hit his neck, it went into the bone and stopped it from going anywhere else. So nobody was hit behind Charlie. I'm just going to say this, my friends, that sounds like a load of bullshit. And because of this statement, it makes me question the incident even more. Everything I laid out last week, all those different theories, I wasn't necessarily willing, and I'm still not saying that this is what is the case, but I wasn't necessarily willing to say maybe Charlie Kirk is alive, like some of you are out there claiming, like, okay, well, Derrick, the whole thing's fake, the whole thing's staged, it's actor, Charlie Kirk was involved, maybe his wife was involved. I've seen some of you saying, look, she's got a G ring, that's Freemason, she's wearing a necklace of the Knights of Malta. Trust me, I check all the theories out there, I listen to all the different things. Doesn't mean I believe them all. But after watching this statement, it sure did make me more suspicious, and I think it's made a lot more people suspicious if you read the statements underneath the comments here. Brian at High Impact Flits, another magic bullet they want us to believe. Those who make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities, and that is the aim here. And then there's other people like Ashton Forbes, who does good work when it comes to free energy stuff, and really disappointing how this guy has just become a Trump supporter. Thank you for sharing this so we can stop the mentally ill people grifting off his death. I will be using this to destroy Ian Carroll permanently tomorrow. Oh my God, come on. I don't even know what's going on there, if they're debating or something, but the point is, this just brought up more questions, made people more suspicious. And then one other note on the Charlie Kirk thing. Some of you were talking about the guy George Zen, who is the person who, after the shooting took place, he started screaming, shoot me, I did this. It was an older white guy. You can see him here in Salt Lake City. He is a Salt Lake City man. He also, coincidentally, happened to be part of 9/11. He was an alleged survivor of 9/11, and he also made a bomb threat at a marathon shortly after the Boston Marathon bombing. And after Charlie Kirk was allegedly shot, this man started screaming, I did it, shoot me, please kill me. And the cops arrested him. And this made some people think, oh, they got the guy. Well, since then, this George Zen has now, not only has he been caught with child porn, which makes me very suspicious, not to say this guy couldn't be involved in child porn, but it kind of makes me feel like maybe this guy was involved in some way and somebody wants to get rid of him, and one of the best ways to get rid of people is to accuse them of child porn. So George Zinn was booked into county jail for investigation of obstruction of justice and sexual exploitation of a minor following a few days at the hospital. Newly released police documents also detail what happened that led to his arrest at Utah Valley University. So after the shot was fired during Charlie Kirk's shooting, there was people talking about this man lying on the ground, surrounded by people who were tending to him. He said, "I shot him, now shoot me," twice. That's what he was screaming. And then he later said that he yelled this because he said, quote, he did this to draw attention from the real shooter. And I mean, this just opens up more questions. So the guy starts screaming, "I shot him, shoot me, I shot him, shoot me." And then later on when they ask him about it, he's like, "I did that to draw attention from the real shooter." And then they happen to find child porn on his phone. I don't know why he would be at an event like this with child porn just hiding on his phone. And he said that after he went to a hospital, he told an officer that, quote, he was glad he said he shot the individual so that the real suspect could get away. I don't know what that means, guys, but it's just adding more mystery to the whole situation. So I will have that in the show notes. And that's where we're going to leave it for the Charlie Kirk stuff today. I got one more quick thing I want to note, but I just want to give you a big thanks one more time while I still got light on my camera here. And thank you to everybody over watching on Civil for dealing with my lack of good lighting. But I just want to thank Civil again, the whole team over there, everybody behind the scenes who is working with Civil to make my show as best as it can be, and for working with me to upgrade civilization. Your mission is my mission, and together we're going to do great things. So I want to invite everybody in my audience once again to go to civil.com, civl.com/TCR. If you're interested in getting my films and other content before anybody else, sign up there. Use TCR20 to get a discount, 20% discount, and get that before anybody else. So I did have another story I wanted to cover, but I'm going to go ahead and save it for next week. I've been kind of teasing it. I do have an update in my investigation to the Utah ritual abuse investigation, but I want to save that till next week so we can get deeper into it, because I'm going to need all of you out there in my audience who are internet sleuths, who are good at finding people and finding information, to help me on a new component of that investigation. The last thing I want to mention is that I am a writer with the Agorist Cipher, which is a newsletter that comes out on a monthly basis, and we've just released our September issue. You can go to agoristcipher.com. That's AGORISTCIPHER.com, agoristcipher.com. And if you want to sign up to get a newsletter, a monthly newsletter that focuses on building parallel systems, decentralized technology, agorist and anarchist philosophy, practical ideas to help you empower yourself, you want to sign up there, and you can use the code Derrick5. I'll put that in the show notes. I just put out a brand new essay called "Is Exit and Build Really a Solution?" And this is a response to many of my critics who say, "Derrick, just going and buying land and trying to exit from the systems, that's not going to do anything. The state's going to come kill you eventually. You're just delaying the inevitable." And in fact, there's even an old essay from my inspiration, Samuel Konkin III, before he died. He called it Anarcho-Zionism, where he criticized people who thought they could just exit the cities and go buy land, and he kind of also didn't think this was a solution. So in this essay, I respond both to my inspiration, Samuel Konkin, and to the critics out there. And there's lots of other great essays. Every month we're releasing essays on tech solutions, on practical solutions. I'm going to be doing an essay very soon on why permaculture and agorism and freedom and anarchism go together. I encourage you guys to check that out. agoristcipher.com. Check it out there. And one last thing, if you want to support my work, besides going and signing up at Civil or supporting the Agorist Cipher newsletter, you can always support me at theconsciousresistance.com/invest. That's the best place to support my work. You can send me support via crypto. You can send me cash in my P.O. box. I've got a new P.O. box tonight, guys, and I haven't checked it in a while, but I would love to get letters from you. I love when you guys send me things. Sometimes I get hate mail. Sometimes I get weird things. Sometimes I get love mail. Sometimes you send cash. I can't accept checks, but I'm happy every time I open up that P.O. box and there's cool things from you guys. So please do go to theconsciousresistance.com/invest, and you can get plugged in there. And of course, my website is theconsciousresistance.com. So thank you guys so much for listening. We're going to go ahead and close out with a music video from my buddy Presence. It's called Ours for the Taking. And this is a great song because, well, freedom is ours for the taking. We can take it right now. We can claim our sovereignty, our liberty. We can stand up for human respect and upgrading civilization by reclaiming our sovereignty, by recognizing that sovereign and other free, powerful, beautiful beings, and building the better world that we know is possible. And I hope you guys will continue to question things. I hope you'll continue to question what they're telling you about Charlie Kirk. I hope you'll continue to question Jeffrey Epstein and all the nonsense they're feeding you there. And I hope you will continue to question this domestic extremism, domestic terrorism propaganda they're trying to feed you, and keep focusing on building the world that we know is possible. Don't buy into the divide and conquer. Don't buy into the people telling you we can't have common ground with people who we disagree with, and push past that. Let's focus on coming together, and let's expose the predator class and build the world we know is possible. Enjoy this song from Presence, my friends. Until next time, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.
Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. Ours for the taking, yeah. Ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Say, fuck the government, al gobierno. They only exist to take your money and your dinero. I ain't scared of nothing, I ain't moving, I ain't budging. Now the population trusting, but through the bullshit we be cutting. Assess the situation if you want liberation. No disinformation, pollute your clear mind. Some be caught up in the lies, must be all that fluoride. Nighty night, keeping them mindless, spineless, fine with it. I got no time for this, taking a trip into the future. No master, no slave, gonna be living with a ruler. By any measure we maneuver, no jabbing, no booster. Cause we ransom and recruiters and we villain prosecutors, hey. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Say, yo, I love to see me brethren standing up for tyranny. The sound of freedom resonating like a symphony. We ain't no fringe minority, a threat to authority. When we coming together, activate a silent majority. See, most people don't wanna rock the boat. They afraid to go against the grain, and the system keeps them broke. So they comply and comply till our freedom implodes. Would have been how they became the fascists at the end of the road. Let's go. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking. History now in the making. The selective consciousness rising, the truth is so inspiring when we shine into this high state of mind. You know, mankind is intelligently designed. We in love with the spirit of a life. Humanity living and breathing to thrive. When we're slipping the waters of line, ayy. My people ready to rise, hey. Let's move into the new paradigm, say, and break the chains of the past. Ascend into the bridge of the future, yeah. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making, yeah. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Freedom ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Freedom is ours for the taking, yeah. History now in the making. Ours for the taking, yeah.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.